Hello, morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for what promises to be an extremely absorbing and interesting session, our keynote session at this year's Indegene Digital Summit of 2024. My name is Sanjay Parikh, and it is my unique pleasure and privilege to introduce our very special guest today for this session, Emmanuel Caeymaex, Chief Commercial Officer and Executive Vice President of Patient Impact at UCB Pharmaceuticals. Over a career of more than 25 years, Emmanuel has played a key role in transforming UCB into a global biopharmaceutical company. He previously led the Cimzia Global Patient Solutions team, served as president of UCB Japan, held several senior roles in epilepsy as well as in the CNS product franchise. Most recently, he was the president of UCB in the United States, and he's also a board member of BIO. Welcome to Indegene Digital Summit, Emmanuel. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for the invite, Sanjay. Great pleasure to be with you and with your large audience.
Thank you, and congratulations at the very outset on your appointment as Chief Commercial Officer and Head of Patient Impact, especially at a time which is a really pivotal point in the journey of UCB. So we're really looking forward to the future under your leadership and stewardship. Let me then, before diving in, I want to kind of start off by actually exploring a little bit about your journey itself. I'd like to begin with you. You've been at UCB for several years and have actually held several roles across several geographies, several markets, etc. But more importantly, what has this meant personally for you? Can you talk to us and our viewers a little bit about your journey at UCB, what it has meant for you personally, and really what has motivated you to kind of soldier through this journey as well as looking into the future?
Thank you for that question, Sanjay. And, I think I've always had a passion for health and education. Care is a value that's very central to me. Also progress in science and technology. I'm trained as a business engineer, so resource allocation, effective and efficient use of limited means is important to me. And I also believe in competition as a way to get the best innovations out there. So with that, I was looking for a company that was active in innovation in the field of healthcare. And I found UCB, and I was actually able to leave for Southeast Asia very early in my career. So when I was 25, I moved to Southeast Asia to open up UCB affiliates, and I actually stayed there in various places for about 5 years. So that really gave me a sense of how healthcare is practiced around the world. I was on the other side of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? I was always the one who didn't speak the language, etc. So it was a good learning as well. But fundamentally, UCB is a company that is there to help people that suffer from severe diseases to live a life that's as free as possible from symptoms or from the uncertainty that comes with disease. And that notion of giving everybody their freedom to be able to determine how they can lead their best life is something that's been very close to my heart. So you take that, you take the focus of UCB on innovation. Just as a reminder, UCB invests 25 to 30% of sales in R&D every year. So it's very high up on the ranking list if we look at that particular criteria. And that's really putting the money where the mouth is, right? In terms of commitment to innovation. So I've been attracted by that. UCB has a stable set of shareholders as well. They own about 35% of the company, which is why UCB is one of the mid-caps that is still independent and really takes a long-term view and really is focused on doing the right thing. And so those values have been very important for me. And over the many years, I've seen UCB morph from a hybrid chemical pharma to a specialty pharma company, becoming the leader in epilepsy, then a biopharma company as one of the very first companies to combine classical pharmaceuticals with biotech products. Back then with the acquisition of Celtech, the biggest British biotech company in the early 2000s. And so more recently, we've really been focused on expanding our portfolio to rare diseases, recognizing that when we add up all these rare diseases, we actually have quite a big problem to solve for people and for society. And the next wave will get us into gene therapy. We're just finalizing the construction of what will be one of the top 10 gene therapy plants in the world. But that's probably for the next decade in terms of patient and commercial impact.
Wonderful. That's really interesting, both your journey in terms of the global kind of experience, but I never realized that UCB actually invests, more than 25% of its top line every year in R&D. That is pretty impressive. And that really actually is a good segue into my next theme that I want to kind of unpack here, and that is around the patient, because putting that kind of money, as you mentioned, putting your money where your mouth is, really is about focusing on the patient and making their lives better. So, we hear so much about patient centricity in the life sciences industry. And I know personally from my interaction with UCB that this is something that UCB embraced several years ago, more than a decade ago or so, putting the patient at the center of it all. And more recently, you've kind of really, shall we say, amplified that patient centricity across all functions in the organization. For instance, even your title as head of patient impact talks about the patient, right? And I believe that there's similar kind of focus even in teams which are not necessarily customer facing, your IT organization, other people who are managing operations. So tell us a little bit about the thinking, the cultural thinking at the level of, the leadership team. When and how did you all embark on this journey? And more importantly, also as a leadership team, and you personally as a leader, what has it taken to kind of, shall we say, percolate this culture into all parts of the organization? Whether it is in people who are facing patients, who are facing doctors, etc., on a daily basis, or even people who are just managing operations, IT platforms, etc., because they are all an integral part of delivering the solutions to the patients. Can you help us understand a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, many colleagues join UCB because of that commitment to patients. And frankly, to an extent, that was the case also before UCB made some very proactive moves to make sure that the patients would become more central, not just on posters, but in the way we make decisions, etc. But it started 20 years ago. Our new CEO back then, Rod Oliver, when looking at the headquarters, was wondering, this looks like a bank here. Where's the patient? And so that's how it started. And initially, as with many companies, right, it's a bit of a change curve here. It was about generating awareness, putting the purpose more central, making sure that we would listen to patients, so inviting patients in and doing that across the world and across teams. Then we moved, after a few years, to co-creating with patients. Think about injection devices, think about other solutions that require development investments, protocols, etc. And that's continued. I'll give you one example. Right now, our benefit risk board, which mainly reviews patient safety matters, has a patient on that board. I think we're the first company to apply that, but it just gives you a sense of how we're trying to embed the patients in what we do. Now, in the end, it's a lot about culture, right? So one needs to utilize all the levers at our disposal to nudge the culture. And of course, it's tone at the top, it's symbols, but it's also working on processes to make sure that what's important to patients, and actually the certainty of having true patient insights, is embedded there. So that's been quite a long journey. And 10 years ago, we really moved into a phase where we had a huge cultural change rolled out. So we trained hundreds and hundreds of leaders and employees about what are the principles that we want to live by, what are the behaviors that are associated with those principles. And so in the end, it's by moving all those behaviors, going beyond just understanding of all the employees, that we've continued to try and really live the purpose every day in a way that goes beyond what's written and what's said. And I think the tagline of UCB, inspired by patients, driven by science, is a very nice reflection of that. And this was coined a bit more than 10 years ago. And it's amazing to see how relevant it has stayed and how much of a rallying cry that still is. Now, of course, a lot of that we can't do on our own. So many times we partner. So, for example, we've partnered with My Health teams to create patient organizations. We even, like patient social communities, let's say, leveraging digital platforms. We even invested in the company early on a little bit just to make sure that those kind of partners would succeed. And one of our colleagues still serves on the board. And then more recently, what we've done is we've organized the whole company per stakeholder, right? So the patient's at the center. And so there are teams in the R&D process that really are focused on the patient. And they then interact with people who have the regulatory needs in mind, those that have the healthcare professional needs in mind, and those that have the payer needs in mind, right? So our view is that UCB sits at the table with stakeholders around the patient, but we don't duplicate those stakeholder groups that are external inside the company to make sure that we truly kind of walk in their shoes as we look at R&D projects and as we prepare launches. With us going into rare diseases, that is even more important, right? Because there are many ways to bring medicines to patients and frankly, to do studies in patients with suffering from rare diseases that don't resemble some of the larger indications that we're in already. So really taking that original view matters because the patient populations are very different and their environments are very different.
Yes, I agree. And I think that, as you mentioned, as you get into rare disease and more specialized areas, I'm sure that need to kind of be able to deliver that personalized kind of experience and actually manage the patient as a whole rather than just a specific therapy will become more important. And I think we saw that very early on, even in UCB's journey, because I think you were among the first few patients to really think of a role like a chief patient officer, whose goal was really just to kind of look at it from the patient's point of view. And it's very interesting to see that you're mirroring what is external in terms of the patient's social community internally in order to kind of make it almost like a seamless, or shall we say, it's a joint effort to kind of conquer the disease or the illness rather than one way. So there's so much more to unpack over there, but I just want to pivot to something else again as far as UCB is concerned. You as a company have had a very strong track record in the areas of neurology as well as in autoimmune disorders. And now essentially you have products in rare diseases like myasthenia gravis, you have other niche indications in immunology, and at the same time, you're participating in a highly competitive area like psoriasis. So on the one hand, this presents a plethora of opportunities, but also its own challenges. So there are a couple of questions I want to ask there. So the first one really is about, at the head of the commercial operations of such an organization, how do you think about balancing resources across portfolios as well as priorities? Because these different portfolios have very different needs. And at the same time, you've got only a limited kind of, or a finite set of resources. So tell us a little bit about how companies like a UCB should think about this.
It's a very good question. And I think the very first step comes with deciding what we will have and keep or potentially partner in our portfolio.
Sure.
So at UCB, we put the bar for product differentiation pretty high. And if that differentiation isn't there, then we need to be first or second in the market, right? But there needs to be sufficient space, in particular in markets that are highly competitive. And if we don't have a scientific assumption that's proven to generate a clinically meaningful difference to what's out there, we may decide not to pursue the asset or perhaps to look for a partner in case scale is really needed on, with the level of differentiation that's good, but, perhaps not excellent, or perhaps not sufficient for us to take it on our own to a competitive field that indeed may be populated with companies way larger than UCB. So that's really important. So the other thing we look at is how can we build a company reputation, right? Because it's more and more clear that the quality of a product and its differentiation, that matters a lot. But once you're launched, a lot is about how healthcare professionals, payers, regulators, etc., perceive you, and also patient organizations in particular in rare diseases. So can we build a reputation fast enough? Can we start early enough? And do we have an approach that's sufficiently differentiated as well? And so that's the second thing we look at. And then the third one is capabilities, right? Is there enough time to build up critical capabilities, or are there ways that we can partner with companies or people in the ecosystem to make sure that those capabilities are in place as we launch?
Got it.
And then, of course, once that is in place, we define what needs to be invested. Then, of course, we look at marginal return on investment, right? And so we've recently, with all the launches now, we have essentially, 7 launches, more than 12 indications over just a few years. We've changed our organization to go back from a global business unit model to more of a general manager-led model, to have single points of our accountabilities that are very, very close to the market and can also be very agile in the way that they reallocate resources in function of the patient and the economic opportunities in different marketplaces. And so with that, we hope that we can maintain that agility. And of course, we've invested significantly on the digital side, because we see this digital transformation as a little bit of an equalizer, where mid-sized companies like us can actually be less disadvantaged and potentially advantaged versus larger competitors. But it takes resources and also the space for everybody to own the innovation, to feel safe, to try things, and then the discipline to share best practices and the mechanism to do that across affiliates.
No, that's wonderful. And I actually, to some extent, you preempted my next question, because it was going to be about nimbleness and agility, especially when you're up against some companies, which some of them may be 5-10 times the size of the UCB in that kind of an environment. So you talked about the digital ecosystem being a bit of an equalizer, or at least setting up a more level playing field. But are there any specific areas of capabilities where you think that UCB has perhaps excelled in terms of the way it has kind of created those capabilities that is sustainable, become much more of a competitive advantage for you as you go out in the marketplace? And I after that, I do want to kind of double click a little bit about launches, but just as a broad generic capabilities, what are some of those areas which you think that UCB has done a good job on?
What we're getting in terms of feedback from our customers is that we typically are able to engage them more holistically. So they actually do notice that we're trying to connect all the stakeholders and the patients and UCB, right? Bring everybody around the table to solve an issue for the patient and for society. And that's very appreciated, and it's different. And, we often hear, oh, it's great, you guys, you don't just write a check. Your commercial and medical organization is able to pull on the scientists and people doing translational work to sit at the table and not only make sure that the current solution will be optimally positioned, etc., but also make sure that we have a voice in your earlier programs. So I would say that that's one big plus. The other one is, we're a smaller ship, right? So when we decide to try and acquire a capability, we can potentially move quicker and also share that faster across the entire organization. And whilst we have a density of launches that's quite impressive, the entire company is still less than 10,000 employees. So, it's not that hard to make sure that best practices are shared. For example, in the field of digital transformation, we started with dynamic targeting, probably around 2017, 18. The next best action we started in 19, took a while to really be used significantly in all key markets. And then we moved to omnichannel with with customer journeys that are really anchored into segmentation, into where they are on the adoption ladder, leveraging more content. So all of those things can happen if you leave enough space, if you resource that properly as a priority, but also if you then kind of close the loop and make sure that there are clear measurements that are transparent, and that there's a little bit of an infrastructure to ensure that that is all shared across our various brands.
Got it. And Emmanuel, you obviously have a very geographically diverse experience yourself. So if you had to think about you've worked obviously for a long time in Europe and European markets. You've actually managed Japan, managed the United States, etc. So when you're thinking about product commercialization in this sense, there are obviously nuances associated with each of these markets, and you talked about some of the stuff that you've got to account for. Can you kind of touch a little bit about that, from how you engage with patients to market access and pricing strategies and everything else, even the leveraging of data and digital technologies? Are there some markets which are easier, harder, etc., or just different? Love to hear a little bit about that, please.
I mean, clearly, the United States is very different from the rest of the world, right? So I think in the US, if you look at the marketing mix for most brands, there's at least half of the resources that go behind patient activation. And there's, of course, the possibility to engage in direct-to-patient branded communications and DTC through many channels, which fortunately are becoming more and more targeted, and therefore hopefully also more efficient. But that's a major difference. Whereas in Europe, there's much more emphasis, and I would say the mix is much more skewed towards scientific partnership, further data generation. In the US, it can be done with real-world evidence and leveraging the payer databases on the data which we're all paying for. Whereas in the US, there's more space to set up real life studies, because we all know that in any given disease, with inclusion exclusion criteria, you probably exclude half of the patients with the disease anyway for all kinds of reasons, right? And so those things are very complementary, but they also call on different capabilities. And the intercontinental markets, as we call them, I see them more as a variation. They kind of sit closer to Europe. So, for example, Japan's pretty centralized, like France in many respects. Canada, Australia, UK, they share the HTA way of looking at product value. So, so we do share a lot of resources across Europe and intercontinental, whether it's in the field of for example, all the omni-channel assets, etc. Much of that is shared. In terms of access, I think, a lot of the business cases we review for pricing and reimbursement, follow the same scheme across all those different markets. Yeah. But often the competitive set is the same, right? So one should also be very clear and very fast at learning lessons across the pond, one way or another, right? Depending who launches first.
Sure. So let's pick up on launches then, and clearly that is something that UCB has done very successfully in the past in neurology, immunology, etc. And now you have a series of new indications as well as new products that are being launched. And UCB is now launching new products after quite some time. So, if you had to reflect on the way you managed launches, 8-10 years ago versus how they are managed today, what are some of the, biggest imperatives that are actually causing either pressure or opportunities on you and your teams in the way you design to launch and the way you kind of organize yourselves to launch?
Yeah, we start the launch excellence process very, very early in the game. And in fact, as soon as you've proven concept with a molecule, you need to know what your access and pricing strategy will be, because one will need to include comparators in a number of diseases that are already relatively well served early in the process, right? And so, it can be in phase 3, it can be in phase 3B, and sometimes you need to figure out your dose ranging strategy, function of what you want to learn to be able to include those comparators, let's say for sake of showing superiority safely in a phase 3, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to happen upstream. Also increasingly, precision medicine is moving slowly, but it is moving. So are there ways that in certain areas we can start segmenting our populations more and having a value proposition that is sharper, potentially for a smaller set of patients? And so we work with our R&D colleagues, and in fact, I chair the asset management board, which actually sets the bar as to what the differentiation needs to be as soon as those assets exit proof of concept, and then regularly thereafter. The second piece is that clearly it is much easier to shape the market and to get to patients now than it was 10 years ago, right? The advent of digital technologies, social media, just the availability of data, and I'm thinking about rare diseases now, to actually identify patients to enable fast recruitment, but then also making sure that as soon as we launch, we have predictive algorithms to identify where they might live, which kind of doctors they might see, and thereby guiding the effort as to where we should deploy and how we should deploy. Those are things that perhaps didn't happen 10 years ago in the same way as they do now. And certainly the data also enabled us to figure out, based on patient inputs into the support programs, what is the unique intervention from a patient support program that would make most sense for them. So really individualizing the support for patients with rare diseases is something that we want to deliver at launch, and therefore needs to be planned well ahead. And then we need to keep learning, right? And the key part of launch is also recognizing early on where our assumptions were off or partially off, and doing something about it, and not kind of sitting on this until it becomes a little late.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. At least what we are seeing also is, on the one side, when we talk about rare diseases, it's about making sure that you map the patient journey all the way from identifying the patient and making sure that they are diagnosed early enough to managing the entire thing. And again, from an industry perspective, we're seeing a lot of companies actually start looking at launch as a capability. So launch excellence as a capability, where you start kind of saying, what are some of those capabilities that I want to make part of my DNA or my as an organization, and look at what are some of those things which I can drive centrally, but at the same time there are things which are very market specific or category specific. How do I kind of make sure that I'm customizing for those categories, whether they're rare diseases or mass market, or how do I make sure that I'm customizing for the US market versus a German market or an Asian market, et cetera, where access to the patient may be different, market access strategies may be different. So we see a lot of that. Emmanuel, we could go on and on, but I have a signal from our producers essentially saying that we're almost out of time, so we have barely about a minute or two to go. But I can't let you go without at least an eye on the future. Essentially, we're all sitting at a pivotal point in this industry as a whole, and UCB in particular, a very exciting phase in its journey. And you're at the helm of that product commercialization journey of UCB. When you look at the industry as well as UCB's journey moving forward, what do you see as or how do you think about the next 5 years between now and 2030, both from the UCB point of view as well as an industry point of view, challenges as well as opportunities?
In every challenge, there is an opportunity, of course, to differentiate. I think for a few decades, we probably were able to get by without paying too much attention to geopolitics, and even health policy had, somewhat limited teeth. I think that's definitely changed now, and so ensuring continuous supply for our patients, it needs to be managed very proactively these days. Some markets have had huge promises that haven't delivered. Some have been quieter and are now delivering now. So really keeping our finger on the pulse and recognizing changes, recognizing where innovation is truly rewarded is very important for a company like UCB. And then, sometimes making hard choices or just accepting to change our model in places where things have changed. The second piece I would say is it's something that's very dear to the heart of our workers, and in particular, the younger generation of colleagues is paying a lot of attention to how we make our medicines affordable, and how do we ensure that we tackle health inequities, right? And so we've started changing quite a few processes, including on the pricing and reimbursement side, to take the willingness to pay and the ability to pay of markets into account, and ensure that innovation spreads faster across all the countries where we're present, and all the smaller markets where we have very good regional partners.
Sorry, we lost your volume for a bit, Emmanuel. Just the last 5 seconds.
Okay, Sanjay, sorry for that. Yeah, I was saying that addressing health inequities is going to be very important, and partnering with stakeholders to make sure that is done, right? It's probably not something a biopharma company can do on their own, but we definitely have our role to play, in particular in areas where we can claim leadership. We can really be a catalyst for that to happen, because often we understand the disease and have more connections with all the stakeholders than each stakeholder individually. And then finally, of course, and Sanjay, you're very close to that. It's the continuous progress with digital technologies, and with the advent of not only AI but generative AI now. I think a huge focus on two things. First, having a data strategy much earlier on. That is something that we're building up now, and we have pockets of good practice, but it's not yet tied together end to end. And so that's one big thing. Making sure that those tools are used in a way that's ethical, compliant, that the data doesn't leak, etc. Right? So we've started putting all of that in place so that all our employees can use such Gen AI tools and co-pilots in a way that that is safe, that is effective, and that is ethical. And then making sure that digital literacy continues to be center stage in our learning investments for our colleagues, because the world is changing very quickly for us and for our customers, and their demands will be changing. In fact, they are as we speak.
Wonderful. Emmanuel, on that note, I would say that's a good note to leave our audience with. I'm sure, like me, everyone who has been basically watching this would agree that this was a very, very illuminating and very absorbing session. We could go on and on, but unfortunately, we are out of time. But in closing, on behalf of all of us, as well as all the viewers on the show, I want to wish you all the very best. Thank you for coming here. And we look forward to continued success from you and your team as you move forward. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
A great pleasure, Sanjay, and all the best with the rest of the program.
Thank you very much.